In this session of the Purple Coffee Podcast, I talked to Gresham about saying no to fear and how I've hacked my own health to bring more prosperity to my life. Hello and welcome to session 7 of the Purple Coffee Podcast, inspiring stories from creative entrepreneurs. I am your host, Turn Dog, and I'm delighted to have you and to introduce the wonderful Gresham, who is not only a scientist and doctor, but a wonderful entrepreneur who helps people reinvent their careers. Our interview was in aid of my book, The Successful Mistake, which is all about an entrepreneur's great mistake and how they turned it around. But before we get to the interview, I want to share a little something about my own world at the minute and how I'm using a few smartphone apps to help hack my health and build basically a better lifestyle day in, day out. It all began a few weeks ago now, where I wasn't that happy with how I was living my life. I was sleeping in too late, going to bed too late, generally getting too much sleep or far too little. I felt a bit sluggish as I walked around. I'd put on a few pounds and I'd just basically let, I suppose, the daily grind get the better of me. And I hate this. I like to be able to get the most out of my days, and although I've still a long way to go, I feel I'm in a much better place, and I put a great deal of that down to 3 particular smartphone apps. They are called Moves, MyFitnessPal, and Sleep Cycle. We'll start with Moves app, which was recently acquired by Facebook, and in the background of your iPhone or your smartphone, it tracks all the steps that you make. So whether you're walking, running, cycling, whatever it is that you're doing, it tracks your steps, your calories that you're burning, the amount of time you're doing it, the miles or kilometers that you cover, and it all happens in the background. You don't have to have a conscious effort, and it tracks your daily and your weekly progress, as well as a few other cool little settings. I love this, one, because it reassured me how much walking I generally do. I often will cover 15 to 20 miles a week, and that's just walking to the train station, the coffee shop, just getting about basically. But it also provides me with motivation, because if I did 60 miles last week, then I want to do 70 miles this week, and I also want to add a bit more running, and I want to be able to do a little bit more of this and burn off a few more calories or spend a bit more time doing it. It's that competitive nature in me, and such an app really drives that forward. So I'm a huge fan of Moves app, and it's helped me just kickstart my exercise, make sure I'm always doing something a little proactive. This combines really well with MyFitnessPal, which basically measures all your food intake. So every time you have a meal, you record it in MyFitnessPal, and it tells you how many calories it involves, how much fat compared to protein and vitamins and all that kind of thing. This is fantastic because it sets a calorie target for you based on your goals, whether you want to gain or lose weight, and your height and your current weight. So if you're wanting to lose some weight and it sets you a calorie intake of 2,000 a day, then you're able to measure how often you hit that target. This is fantastic for losing weight in the short term, but it's also amazing in the long term because it has over 2 million meals and food items on its database. Every single meal you have, you're able to basically note it in there and see what it kind of counts to your diet. Over time, you're able to make sure you're getting a balanced diet between carbs and fats and proteins and sodium and potassium and all these things. So it's something that can grow with you as you get healthier and you learn more about what does and doesn't work for you. Together with Moves app, this is fantastic. The final one is Sleep Cycle, which is an intuitive and quite magical app that just goes under your pillow and basically analyzes your sleep at night. You start off by saying when you want to wake up, say 7 o'clock in the morning, and it creates a 30-minute window. So basically it measures your sleep throughout the night, when you're in deep sleep, when you're in light sleep, when you're awake. So between 7 and 7:30 in the morning, it basically waits until you're at your optimum awake level, and then it plays a soothing sound to wake you up. None of these harsh alarm clocks which shock you into an upright position. It's lovely and it's fantastic to help you know when to go to bed, how many hours sleep is good. You can track your mood. It helps you get to sleep with sounds as well. It's got loads and loads of features, and it's 69p. So it's a very cheap app. So yeah, between those three apps, I highly recommend you check them out. They've been an absolute lifesaver for me. I've got a long way to go. I'm not at the level I want to be, but these apps are helping. So yeah, I encourage you to check them out, and I'll put those links below this video on the session page, which will be at bit.ly/purplecoffee7. So what about Jen Gresham and her interview for The Success Mistake? Well, I asked Jen if she would do an interview with me some months ago, and she was kind enough to say yes. And she's got a very interesting background indeed. She is a scientist and a doctor by profession, but decided to leave that world because it didn't give her enough, and basically started off as a self-made entrepreneur, where she helps people reinvent their careers. She does speaking and coaching and consulting and the like. But we talk about her great mistake, and I feel it's something everyone can sympathise with, because when we leave our job to set up our own business or to start working for ourselves, we have all these ideas, but we don't truly know whether we're going to be making the right decisions. So we sign up for a lot of courses, we second guess ourselves, and although that can be a good thing from time to time, it's very counterintuitive in my opinion. It can really set you back, and instead of getting to where you want to be in 6 months, it ends up taking you a year or 18 months because you just spend yourself doubting and having no faith in your actions. But first, you might be wondering who this Jen girl is. So I went on her website, I checked out her about page, and I decided to tweak it a little bit and create a story only a crazy storyteller like myself can do. So without further ado, I'm going to read off my iPhone now and tell you a little tale. So, Jennifer Gresham is a doctor. She's a scientist. She's super smart, but despite all this, she up and left her previous world to help people reinvent their careers. Now, I don't know about you, but I find this rather greedy indeed. As if it isn't enough to be super smart and get to put doctor in front of your name on your passports and driving license, Jennifer gets to rock out the entrepreneurial world in awesome land too. Well, Miss Gresham, next time you decide to rule everything you touch, think about the rest of us. Although you may be too busy writing and speaking and coaching and helping people reinvent their career and everything else that you do. So, over to you, Doctor. Thoughts too. I'm delighted to be joined by Jennifer Gresham, who is the founder of the No Regrets Academy. So Jennifer helps people make their own world, I suppose. You know, they move from their job and they start their own business and they find happiness. But I'm sure she'll tell us a little bit more detail than that. I'm sure I've summarised it too briefly there. But Jennifer, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Well, let's begin by asking you to share with us who you are, what it is you do, and a little bit about you.
Yeah, so as you already said, I'm Jen Gresham, and I started out life as a PhD scientist. I worked in the military, in the Air Force, for 16 years doing science. And that was all well and good. I was fairly good at it, though I wasn't any kind of rock star. And at some point, I decided, you know what, this really isn't for me. I've invested a lot in this, getting a degree and all this time, and I had a great boss, and I just said, there's got to be more to life than this. Because in the end, I really enjoyed my days off more than my days on. And so I made the rather rash decision to quit without knowing what I wanted to do next. And fortunately, when you decide to leave the military, at least in the US, you get 6 months before they will actually let you leave because it takes so long to do the paperwork. And so I was frantically, trying to figure out, okay, well, what's this thing that's going to make me happier than where I was? And there was a lot of pressure, to kind of figure it out. And I did not make that 6-month deadline, but I did get started. And ultimately, it was that scientific background that really helped me. And so I started setting up a series of experiments, career experiments.
Interesting.
And that's how I've gotten to where I am today. And I guess I also would add that I'm still in the middle of it, right? I mean, I don't really see them as finished and then ta-da, I'm all done. I have my answer. It's a series of experiments. I'm still in the midst of it. And I liken it to, because I'm a biochemist, I liken it to a moth who is chasing a scent, right? And it's never a straight path. And so I'm closing in on the right path for me, but I'm at least going in the right direction.
How interesting, and I think that's fascinating. Looking at a career as a set of experiments, and I suppose finding the right one which will work for you and no one else. So, at the minute you're doing this No Regrets Academy, so that must be rather interesting for you. You must meet
I
some
love
rather
it.
interesting folk.
And it's interesting because I actually never intended to become an entrepreneur. So this whole set of experiments that I went through was actually to become a writer. That was where I thought I wanted to go and still do. But in the process of doing that, I started my blog, Everyday Bright, and I was just sort of talking about what I was going through and my approach and my ideas, and that caught on. And pretty soon, I started getting all of these inquiries from people saying, "How can I hire you?" And I said, "Hire me to do what? I mean, what is it I would do for you?" And they said, "Well, we want to know how to do what you've done with your career because you seem so happy." And I said, "Oh, well, that's interesting. I still really don't feel like I have that figured out." But again, going back to that scientific training, it's so funny because going from being a scientist to a writer, and all the scientists were like, "You are nuts. Like, you've obviously gone off the deep end. You don't know what you're doing." But that scientific training was very applicable to what I ended up doing. And so I said, you know what? I can go back to kind of the first principles and put together a structure and a framework that leads people down the path. And even though everybody has different issues and things that they need to think about and deal with, I can give them a framework to answer that question of what do I want to do next with my career that's going to make me happy, successful, and fulfilled. And that's really what the No Regrets Career Academy is all about.
Fantastic, and I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this can empathise a great deal because so many of us start our own businesses because we're a bit disillusioned with life at work. It might be that you don't like your job, or you just don't like working for someone else, or you just like the freedom of being able to wake up when you want and work where you want. So I'm sure people can empathise with that, and it's the idea of finding something that matters and you can be passionate about day in day out. And like you say, actually wake up and enjoy it. If you're enjoying your days off so much more than what you're doing working, that's a bit of a sign that work's not working.
That's right. That's right. And I think work shouldn't be about working, actually.
No.
It should be about playing and experimenting and following your curiosity. And so I try and help people do that.
I love it. Well, I'm on board. I love it. I love it. Well, we're going to talk today about the mistakes that Jen's made, and it's all in aid for the successful mistake. So we're going to look at how she turned it around and got to where she is today. And with her looking at her career like a set of experiments, I'm sure she's had a bit of trial and error along the way. So Jen, please tell us a bit of a tale behind the mistake itself, what occurred, and the journey you've been on since then.
Well, I think because I came to entrepreneurship somewhat by accident, it wasn't intentional, but also because, I mean, you can imagine, right? I was a scientist and a military officer. Neither of those are what you would consider excellent preparation for running your own business, right? I'd been told what to do my entire life. And so here I had to figure everything out for myself. And I cannot tell you, I was scared out of my mind. And it was compounded by the fact that, again, we hadn't really planned for me to leave the military when I did. My husband's also military, and sort of soon after I made my transition, these transitions have a sort of a bow wave effect, by the way, people should know. So once you do it, everyone's like, "Oh, yeah, well, gosh, look how happy you are. Maybe I should do that too." So my husband started thinking about leaving his job, and I was like, "Oh my God, like,
What have I done?
right, like." has anybody thought about an income? And so I thought not only should I pursue this because I do have people apparently who want to give me money for something, but we absolutely needed it. And I was really, really frightened. But what was funny, I suppose, is that my response to that, and again, maybe because of my training, was okay, I need to learn as much as I can about this. And that means signing up for courses and getting mentors and all of that. So I spent an extraordinary amount of money on entrepreneurship courses. I went a bit overboard. It was sort of like getting a PhD in entrepreneurship. And uh, great. I learned a lot. But first of all, when you do that, when you kind of take that fire hose and you're like, okay, I'm going to become an expert in everything immediately, you can't implement all of those things in your business right away, right? So you have these ideas, these general concepts, but your business isn't at a point at which you can implement it because you're just starting. So that's a little frustrating. But at the same time, I think the worst part of this mistake, and this really is the mistake, is that I ate up all the money that I made in courses. And so even though I had a very successful launch, so my very first launch was incredible. I made, I want to say, I have to admit, I don't know the exact numbers because I'm not a detail person, but let's say it's somewhere on the order of like $30,000
Wow.
in a couple of weeks.
Wow.
And that was great, except that I then spent like $35,000 in my first year as a business. So that's really deflating, like you're
Yeah.
like, wow, I had this incredible success. Now I actually have to repeat that over and over again because I'm in the hole, I mean, I've actually put myself in a position that's taking money instead of making money, which is not the purpose of a business, by the way. And so it was actually, it made the stress worse. It made me feel like I was a complete idiot. And so it was very counterproductive. And I had to work my way out of that. I heard once somebody told me starting a business is a little bit like deciding to become bipolar. Right, because the roller coaster emotionally,
Yeah.
you're
Oh
just
God,
like,
yeah.
oh, I love this. Oh my God, this is the worst thing I've ever done in my life. And I was on that roller coaster, and it took me a long time to get out of that, and both financially and psychologically, and to convince myself that I knew enough, I'm smart enough, I'm good enough, gosh darn it, I can do this. And so I finally got to the point where I said, no more courses. I will not
Mm.
allow myself to sign up for anything else. And I'm just going to start implementing everything I've learned.
It's so because in your case it was courses, but I think this applies to a lot of people. When you start out, I know I was a bit like that. I set a certain amount aside, and I was like, right, I'm going to buy certain hardware and software, make sure I'm ready and primed. And somehow, spending that money in the initial thing, it makes you feel a little bit better because it's like you're preparing yourself. And I there are so many amazing courses out there, but they are often very expensive. And if you're doing sort of five, six, 10, then it can quickly add up. But people, they do rush into things and think, yo, I need this and I need that, and I should sign up to this and I should go to this event and I should do this and this. And you have to be careful in the beginning, don't you? Because one, you've only got so much time, you've only got so much money and resources, and do you really need all that equipment, all that software, all them courses? And usually, if you take a step back and look at it rationally, it's no, I can probably get away with just this, and then maybe in a year's time I'll add to it. But for now, let's concentrate on that.
Yeah, I think there's still that sense of a quick fix, right?
Mm.
Like the reason I'm not making more money isn't because I'm not working hard enough or whatever. It's I don't know the right thing. There's something out there that is going to magically make my business six figures in the first month. And even though I'm a rational person, but that's still
Absolutely,
riding
yeah,
around right in
yeah.
my head that no, there's just something you don't know yet. And once you know that, everything's going to become easy. And I think it's resetting your expectations No, actually, starting something new is hard. And I think the other piece of it is, and I see this with career changers a lot, is you feel like you need someone else to tell you you're good enough
Yeah.
or you're prepared enough or all of that. We get so much of our validation externally, and to finally say like, no, you know what, I do know what I'm doing, and I don't know enough to run Virgin, right? But I know enough to get this small service off the ground and to start helping people, and that's really what a business is all about.
Yeah, and you need to have confidence in yourself, in your product, and I suppose the customers or your readers, whoever it might be, that you understand them and you know them quite well. And if you don't know them enough, then learn and really try and unearth who they are and what they do, and sort of cater for them. But yeah, if you try and do too much, your mind will go insane. And I suppose it'll be quite, I don't know whether it's worrying or good to know, but if a scientist can have them sort of irrationalities sort of come in from time to time, I'm not sure whether that's a worry for people like me, or whether it's sort of nice to know that it can happen to everyone.
Well, I think I really believe it's inevitable that those irrationalities will come up at some point or another because you're doing something hard.
Yeah.
And we all want to make it easy. We all wish that we could just say, snap of the fingers, oh, now it's easy. And it just isn't. And so I think that resetting of your expectations about what running a business will really be like, what your growth will really be like. And, we compare ourselves to the people we read about in the media. I used to just devour Entrepreneur Magazine. And, you have to remind yourself that those people are getting profiled because they're rare, not because they represent what most people's business trajectory looks like.
Very, very true. And there's no such thing usually as an overnight success. A lot of overnight successes are years in the making, and you just don't hear that side of it. But yeah, I think it's fascinating the sort of angle you've come from. So these days, do you approach things differently when the sort of money comes in? You don't automatically think, right, what can I spend it on? It's a case of, right, what do I need? And how do you approach? Because it must be difficult with you doing this career of experiments. You're always thinking about your next experiment or your next potential venture, and it's so easy to, I guess, allow it to spiral out of control. Has this experience, this mistake, as you will, sort of taught you to reel it back in and be a bit more realistic on things and think, right, let's tick some boxes here.
There's a few things I got out of this. One was I mentioned I'm not a detail person, which is sort of funny, I suppose, as a scientist.
Yeah.
Maybe it's why I was not a good scientist. I absolutely hate details. You want me to come up with a strategy? No problem. But for the first, I think like 6 months, it was a long time. I had no idea how much money was coming in or going out, what my expenses really were. I just couldn't be bothered. So as long as I wasn't about to bounce a check, I thought I was okay. And so I finally invested the money in an accountant. And I can't say enough how important that was because I couldn't get my expenses under control until I knew what they were. And so now that I've got an accountant, I also have people helping me. So I'm not trying to do everything myself. And this was something that Laura Roeder told me. I met up with her when she was visiting London, and she said, far more people would be better off taking the money that they want to spend on a course and using it to hire help.
That's very interesting. Yeah.
Right? And I
Yeah.
was like, oh, yeah,
Light
that's what I
bulb.
need. I
But
need help.
you have to respect your strengths and everything, and sometimes you take a course because you want to improve a skill set, but it'd be so much easier and often the right thing to do to hire that designer or hire that accountant or hire that person who can create that platform for you. Now, I'm a firm believer in everyone should try and learn as much as possible and try and understand things, but you're not going to be good at everything. There's no point even trying. Like, try your hand at it, but then once you know where your limitations are, accept that and go, right, I need someone to do this for me because I won't do a good enough job.
Well, and I think the other big piece of it is not only will you not do as good a job as somebody who's trained in it, and who really excels at it. But as your business grows, you simply will not have time.
Yeah.
And what I finally got to is that the question I ask myself all the time now when I'm looking at my to-do list is that going to make me money? And, and do I want to do it? Right. So if I don't want to do it, but it'll make me money, then that's another question. But if I do want to do it, I have to ask myself, is that going to make me money? Or am I better off paying someone else to do it and
Yeah.
I do something that will make me more money? And
Absolutely.
I think, once you start getting in that mindset, it's amazing how you can reconfigure how you spend your time as an entrepreneur. And so this has really led me back to where, again, we talked about what our strengths are. My strength is in content creation and in coaching, and so that's where I spend my time, and I make a lot more money doing it.
Fantastic. And I suppose in your case, it wasn't so much of not spending as much money, rather just placing it somewhere else. So trying to teach it yourself, trying to understand it yourself. It's a case of, oh, I will hire someone to do this for me. I will hire them to take it away, because we only have 24 hours in a day.
Right, right. And I'm a firm believer, right? I did not start this business to be miserable. And
No.
so, right, my daughter is little. I want to spend time with her. I want to have adventures. So I just got back from a trip dog sledding up in the Arctic. I want to have time and money to do that. And if my business isn't letting me do that, then something's really wrong. And so that's the other piece of it, right? Is that and again, this was one of the best things I got out of all these courses I took. When you start a business, you have to think about what is the life you want to lead first. And then you design your business around it.
Yeah.
And you may very well, give up on a very profitable line of work. And this is something I'm about to do, which is very scary, by the way. I'm about to take the most profitable thing I do, and I'm about to stop doing it because it's simply not how I want to spend my time. It's not the lifestyle that I want to lead.
But it's them brave decisions that make and break people, because I think you need to follow the passion. And yes, it needs to make business sense and it needs to add up the numbers. But I personally think, and from the people who I often speak to, they're much happier earning less money as long as they're happy doing it, rather than earning more money and it just being, well, not necessarily miserable, but it's just constantly dragging them down, and they have no time to spend with their children, and they have no time to actually spend their money on holidays because they're just at work 24/7. So
Yeah, and I really believe like, these other projects that I would really like to be spending my time on, they're not going to replace this other income source right away, right?
no.
There's a ramp up period. And so you have to give yourself that time and you have to kind of budget for that. But to say, like, I really believe that in the end, I will have as much success with that as I do with this other income stream, given the time and the energy that I can devote to it. And really, I mean, in some ways, my other biggest mistakes as an entrepreneur have all been based out of fear and for a sense of security, right? So taking on projects that pay me a lot of money, but they take up so much time that I can't really get that ramp up going on these other areas.
Absolutely. And it sounds like you are the perfect example of what I call wandering in the wilderness. And I think so many entrepreneurs and business owners have to do that. I include myself in this category, where you know you want to work for yourself, you have a good idea of what you want to do, but it's not clear. It's all a bit hazy. And you need to
Yeah.
spend a few months, or in some cases a few years, wandering around, trying different things, seeing what you are passionate about and what not. And have, I suppose, faith. And it's hard because it's the scariest time. It's when fear wants to just wrap its cold hands around your neck, but you need to fight it off and go, no, I'm going to keep on plugging away. I'm going to find this, keep faith in myself. And usually, from the experiences that I've seen, it leads you down the route that you need to take. And it might not be a necessarily quick fix, but it's often the right fix.
That is it. It's not a quick fix. I can guarantee it leads you in the right direction. I just can't tell you how long it'll take you to get there, right? But every time you find something that you don't want to do, that's not a failure, that's a
No,
success.
exactly.
Um, because in my mind, it's so easy to romanticize what things are going to be like, right? We think like, oh, I really want to do this, and you don't really know until you go do it.
Yeah.
And I think people need to be a lot more comfortable with saying, I'm going to go try this out. And if it doesn't work out, that's okay. I'm not a failure. I'm not a flake. I'm an experimenter, and we'll see where it takes me.
I like it. I'm going to steal that. When people ask me things, I'm just experimenting. I'm a scientist.
That's right. I'm a scientist.
I'm a scientist who doesn't have a PhD. It's fine.
None required. And I
Yeah,
think,
great.
right, that really is. I think if all of us got back to that place of, I'm going to go where my curiosity leads me and where my intrinsic motivation leads me. And granted, you need to be willing to give up on things relatively quickly that aren't panning out. If it seems like, wow, you know what, no one is willing to pay me to do that, you need to stop doing that and make it a hobby. But you don't give up on the dream of saying, this is the life I want to lead, and I'm pretty sure I can figure out eventually how to make that happen.
Fantastic. So before we end this amazing interview with so much insight, would you be able to offer one piece of advice to someone who's just thinking about starting out? And I suppose you do this often with your academy. What do you generally tell people, like, first up, if there's one thing? There's obviously more, but
Yeah, gosh, there's so many. I guess one thing I would say, again, along these lines of experimenting with a business idea, is to really think about pre-selling. So, for example, when I wanted to start up my No Regrets Career Academy, I had not created the course. All I had done was write down in my mind what a series of lessons might be, and
okay.
then I sold it.
Really?
And so I ended up creating that first course as we went along instead of creating the whole thing, investing a huge amount of time and honestly, right, ego in it, and then finding out that nobody wanted it. So I think everybody who starts a business should find a way to pre-sell and find out if someone really wants to pay you for that before you invest all that time and energy.
Very, very interesting. I like it. And it links in, I suppose, a bit like the new crowdfunded way, where with things like Kickstarter and Indigo. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think those are great avenues to explore, but you don't really even
no.
have to do something that formal. If you have some sort of service, just go out and pitch three people and see if any of them say yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other piece of it is, and this is a piece of advice I got from Ramit Sethi, is that you really only need three people to say yes before you know that you have something that has legs. And you're going to have to do a lot of tweaking to make that into a viable business. But if three people say yes, then you probably have something worth pursuing.
Fantastic. Well, I hope, viewer, you have learnt a great deal from Jen's advice. I'm sure you have. I know I have. I'm inspired and I want to go and note some things down. So, Jen, thank you very much for joining me and sharing your words.
Thanks so much. I'm glad it helped, and I look forward to hearing from other interviews.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to sharing them. So, thank you and goodbye.
Bye.
And there you have it, a huge thank you to Jennifer Gresham for her wonderful insight, and indeed you for watching or listening to this session of the Purple Coffee Podcast. I personally can sympathise a great deal with what Jennifer talked about, because when we do start out, and to an extent even a great deal further down the line, you always self-doubt your ability. You feel like what you're thinking, your idea, the creations you're creating, they might be good, but we're just not sure. And I sense even the most profound and successful entrepreneur will still have this doubt creep in. Where Jen signed up to one course after another and spent all her money on trying to always improve, she was ultimately just wasting time and, lacking that faith in herself and that conviction to just go ahead and do what it is that she does. Once she had that faith and that assurance to just go ahead and do it, she was able to spend her resources more wisely. And even though she still spends her money, it's on people helping her rather than teaching her. After all, she is a doctor and a scientist, so she is rather smart. So a huge thanks for Jen, and a huge thanks to you. If you've been watching this on Vimeo, please consider following the channel so you can watch all the Purple Coffee Podcast editions. And if you are listening to this on iTunes, please consider subscribing and to also leave an honest review. A review can go a long, long way. And if you want to check out all the links and the apps that I was talking about earlier, head over to bit.ly/purplecoffee7. It's got all the details about Jen. I encourage you to check her out on Twitter and her website and to follow her online and all the other things that we talked about today. And that's all there is to it. So another session over with. Thank you so much for joining me. If you've got any comments, please hit me on Facebook or Twitter. And until next time, you crazy misfit, have a great one. Awkward wink.